More than anything else, I want to go to heaven. But what about you? Each day here only further reinforces my desire. But why? What is the motivation? What is so wonderful about heaven? We find glimpses of heaven throughout the Bible. We see it in the Garden of Eden, in the tabernacle, later in the temple, but especially we see glimpses of heaven in the church. But what do these seemingly disparate places have in common? The common theme running through these places is God, the very presence of God. In the beautiful Garden of Eden, God walked in the cool of the day, Genesis 3 verse 8. There was provision, there was purity, and there was the presence of God. And then in the tabernacle, this movable house for the Lord, the glory of God resided there in that place. We read in Exodus chapter 40, beginning in verse 34, "Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." When Solomon dedicated the temple, he said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in the thick darkness, but I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever." 2 Chronicles 6, the first two verses. When man sinned, God's presence was withheld from him. In Genesis 3, beginning in verse 17, Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden and removed from that intimate relationship that exists in the presence of God. When Israel's idolatry became too much, God's presence left the temple, never to return, as we read in Ezekiel 10. Later on, the prophet Ezekiel prophesied concerning the presence of God returning to his people. In Exodus 43, we see a beautiful look at the coming kingdom in the form of the church. The church is God's temple, as Paul presents in 1 Corinthians 3:16, and his presence can always be found within his faithful children. From the time of creation on, man has been searching for the fullness of God's presence. And the real draw to heaven is that it is the dwelling place of God. It is where God physically resides. And this God who dwells in heaven is a holy God. When Isaiah was given a vision of heaven, he's introduced to the one that the seraphim describe as holy, 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 Isaiah 6:3. When John is taken to heaven in the Spirit, he sees four living creatures who never cease to say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come," Revelation 4:8. The God who dwells in heaven is glorious. This glory is overpowering. It is beautiful. This God who dwells in heaven likewise is victorious. We see the example of the rider on the white horse conquering his enemies in Revelation 19. We see the defeat of Satan in Revelation 20, the victory over death in 1 Corinthians 15. And this allows us to live forever, sheltered from pain and despair and loss. This God who dwells in heaven is loving. His steadfast love endures forever, as the psalmist tells us. In love, God wipes away every tear from the eyes, Revelation 21:4, and holds close those who have held on to him. And any place fit for such a being has to be wonderful beyond our human comprehension. Friends, God is why heaven is wonderful. God is why we long for that eternal place. And if you will desire him and find your fulfillment by living a life of obedience to him, then heaven will be your eternal dwelling place as well. Friends, we want to thank you for joining us for our program today, and have a blessed day.